Coming up on today's show, it is another back-to-back that our Bucks are faced with. We get you set for another Central Division showdown against a team on the rise. We take a look at the matchup with the Indiana Pacers next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia here with you today for this game preview. And as always, we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We're free. We're available wherever you get your podcast and viewable on YouTube as well. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We start with the injury report typically when we do these game previews, but it is worth noting both teams, the Bucks and the Indiana Pacers, played last night. So neither of the two have submitted their injury report yet. In talking with Adrian Griffin prior to the game yesterday, it didn't seem as though there was any reason to believe we wouldn't see anyone available for the game today. Obviously, part of the plan with Chris Middleton missing the game was that he'd be available for this Pacers game. And Griff even said when reviewing it, they felt it was best to have Chris Middleton for this Pacers game. So it'd definitely be a surprise if Chris is unavailable today. And as far as other guys, it's still early in the season, so I don't think we've reached that point quite yet. And if you want to be the optimist as well, Giannis is certainly rested after the fiasco we saw yesterday, which Camille and Frank touched on with that ejection coming 3 minutes into the second half. So I don't anticipate any names either than the G League players being unavailable for this game unless something happened or there's some rest the team was looking for that occurred overnight, but should be all systems go for the Bucks on that front. As for the Indiana Pacers, again, not quite sure, not as familiar with that team, obviously in their day-to-day dealings, but I mentioned they played last night as well, and this Pacers team is off to a very, very good start so far this season, as Tyrese Halliburton, certainly the big piece there. They're going to enter play tonight, just a half game back of the Bucks at 5-3, and they absolutely dismantled the Utah Jazz last night. So Tyrese Halliburton, 13 assists, 16 points. They're a team that likes to push the pace. And the other thing that I know Camille and Frank have talked about a little bit last night, especially on the postgame pod, but the postgame pods throughout this season, is we knew this could be an issue coming into this season, and especially early in the season. We have seen guards give the Bucks some fits early into this year, just 7 games in. You think about what the Atlanta Hawks were able to do and how Trae Young was getting to his spots on the floor. 45 points from Jalen Brunson. Cam Thomas scored 45 points. Cade Cunningham in the game last night for the Pistons finished with 33 points. It seemed like he was going to be in line for another 40-point performance against the Bucks, and even Marcus Sasser off the bench with 26 points. So the Bucks have been stretched pretty thin defensively in the backcourt, and there's going to be no let up with the opponent tonight in the Indiana Pacers. Tyrese Halliburton, a big part of that and how he pushes the pace. Benny Matherin, second-year pro out of Arizona, has the capability of doing it and being a scorer in bunches. Scored 22 points in that win against the Jazz last night. That would spend an up-and-down season for Matherin. And Aaron Nesmith, a lot of guards that the Pacers have. Buddy Hield, to another name we've certainly mentioned quite a bit prior to additions like Malik Beasley and Damian Lillard. But a lot of scoring ability in the backcourt for the Indiana Pacers, and that is going to be one area to keep an eye on in this game. Can the Bucks defense start to piece together some stops? It's floated out there, and I know we all witnessed it as well. Second half, this team does seem to come together a little bit more down the stretch on both ends of the floor, but more specifically on the defensive end. And that's what we saw once again last night. It wasn't pretty, but the Bucks were able to go back to zone. They did a lot of trapping as well, primarily in that fourth quarter, and that's when they made their charge and came up with some much-needed stops. We saw the exact same thing Monday night in Brooklyn against the Nets, where the Bucks went to more different, unique looks, some zone, and that seemed to be the ticket to success. The 2-3 zone that the Bucks were employing slowed down the Brooklyn Nets. It did the same thing against the Pistons. So they're starting to slowly figure that out. Now you just look for this to be over the course of 48 minutes that the Bucks look to figure these things out and piece together a more consistent effort on the defensive end of the floor. Some more numbers to share about that second half and specifically fourth quarter. And this time, we're not just talking about Damian Lillard. So we will get to that when we return as we continue to take a look at this matchup today with the Indiana Pacers tonight with the Indiana Pacers. And it should be a fun one that we witness another Central Division showdown and quite possibly the two best teams in the Central Division, given some of the struggles in the early going this season that we've seen from the Cleveland Cavaliers. So we'll touch a little bit more on what we've seen on a quarter by quarter basis for the Bucks, because we saw more of that last night. We'll get to that after we tell you about Prize Picks here on Locked On Bucks. And Prize Picks, the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, and that always includes pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and just watch the winnings roll in. This is just more or less than that we're looking at, something you do with your friends in your personal life, and now it's on Prize Picks. Basketball season's here. You can pick combo projections across football and basketball. Look, you could combine Giannis ejections if you wanted to. You could look at Giannis blocked shots and Aaron Jones touchdown runs if you want to do a combo of 4.5 on that. LeBron James, Travis Kelce, you name it. You can combine any players from any of those sports. If you want to play alongside Prize Picks' favorite players like Meek Mill, Andrew Schultz, the comedian, you can now find that in community plays under the promos tab of the app, and view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. They even offer a reboot policy so that all your entries stay in play, even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player that exits the game in the first half and they don't return in the second half, that player's rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. And again, it's simple. It's very easy to play. Multiple options. Simply go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that web address, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA, and use the promo code LockedOnNBA for your first deposit match up to $100, all through Prize Picks. All right, so we mentioned what we've seen changing for this Bucks team, and I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I'm going to keep repeating it. This is going to be a process for this team. The offense has changed. The defense has changed. 40% of your starters right now are new, and that may change throughout the course of the year as well. I know there's already been some chatter of Malik Beasley. Before we do get to those numbers quarter by quarter basis, let's just tackle that conversation. I've said repeatedly, talked about it with Camille. I've talked about it on some of these pods that I've done solo as well. I think Malik Beasley has been a willing defender for the Bucks this season. No one is expecting Malik Beasley to step in and to be Drew Holiday. Nobody's expecting Malik Beasley to step in and even be an above average defender. I think he's accepted the challenge that he's been given. He has been a willing defender. He's moved his feet. He's embraced that. He's not going to be a top tier defensive player. He has some of the tools that you would look to in terms of his length and his wingspan. On paper, Malik Beasley is a perfect 3-and-D player. But I think we're starting to see more and more, and what a lot of the chatter has been is, look, this made a lot more sense when Drew Holiday was on this team, that Malik Beasley could then get off some more shots. And also, you're going to benefit, I should say, from playing alongside Drew Holiday. He can still put in that defensive work, but you have the ultimate safety net out there in the perimeter in a Drew Holiday, and that's only going to boost your team defense and individual defense as well for a player like Malik Beasley. When Dame Lillard arrived, that changed. And again, it's not to suggest that Malik Beasley cannot improve defensively, because I think we have seen some growth this season. But to me, the bigger aspect of this is offensively. It just makes less sense to have those two playing a bulk of their minutes together and Malik Beasley starting, because that's what this comes down to. I know his minutes had dropped off the last couple of games, but when we talk about starting, it's not so much who starts the game and the importance there. It's about the minutes that you share on the floor with those players and the matchups that you have. And ideally, if Malik Beasley is coming off the bench, you can bring him in those moments when Damian Lillard is off the floor. And it's not solely for the defensive reasons, because I've seen a lot of it's two defensive liabilities. It's certainly not two all NBA defensive players in your backcourt. But to me, the bigger thing is offensively, that you would like to maximize the minutes that Malik Beasley is on the floor with Giannis and pair those up with the minutes where you're resting Damian Lillard and you have one of those explosive players in terms of his drive to the basket, but more importantly, shooting and the shooting ability of Dame Lillard off the floor without Giannis. That's where Malik Beasley comes into play. And again, it's a lot like what we saw from Grayson Allen. I think Malik Beasley's a better shooter and gives you more avenues for getting a shot off. But you want to look at maximizing the minutes that Malik Beasley is on the floor with Giannis and not so much Damian Lillard. Because as it sits right now, we see the starters open the game, and it's been very fluid in who's the first player to leave the floor. Traditionally, it was always Giannis would come off the floor under, but we've seen it go up and down. We saw Dame early. Now more consistently, it's been Giannis and Damian Lillard staying out there on the floor with Brook Lopez, which is one of those other two-man pairings we all said. I'm very curious to see not just the Giannis and Dame two-man game, but the Giannis and Brook and Dame and Brook and Dame and Bobby as well. So to me, that's where you should target Malik Beasley's minutes, is the minutes that Dame exits the floor and Giannis is out there, and Malik Beasley can be that guy that hunts open shots. Because when you're opening the game and playing for 4 or 5 or more minutes with Malik Beasley out there alongside Giannis, alongside Dame, alongside Brook Lopez, and alongside Chris Middleton, that's going to impact the amount of times Malik Beasley is able to touch and shoot the basketball. We've seen a handful of those games. The two losses this season are the high volume shot games for Malik Beasley. 6 shots last night. He was efficient last night in 4 of 6, just 2 3-point attempts though. And that's kind of been the constant as you look at the 3-point attempts Malik Beasley's been getting off this season and think this number should be a little higher. We mentioned earlier in the week, he was averaging 5 3-point attempts. That number is going to keep dropping now with 2 last night, but he was averaging just over 5 3-point attempts per game. That was his lowest total in 4 years. It's very early. I would expect that number to go up, but it all boils down to who's he on the floor with, because in those groups, Malik Beasley is going to eat fifth. So I think we'll continue to see people certainly have some chatter about this, but I do think this is one of those things that will eventually get addressed and sorted out, that we've seen Adrian Griffin look to maximizing things and open to change very early in this season. I wouldn't be shocked if we see that as well. And it's not an indictment at all on Malik Beasley. It's all about maximizing the personnel that he's out there on the floor with. But it opens the question of who replaces him. Last night, it was Jay Crowder that replaced Chris Middleton. Did seem to add a little more synergy and just fit even more. MarJon Beauchamp is going to get a lot of chatter. We've spoke very highly of MarJon Beauchamp this season, but I think even last night, it stood out even more last night that one of the things MarJon needs to continue to work on and improve at on the defensive end of the floor is his ability to navigate screens. And look, it's a tough comp to put him up against Jrue Holiday because he's maybe the best player in the league, but that's one of the major flaws that stands out right now with this Bucks defense when we talk about the guards that have been getting going and having big games against the Bucks is that two-man game the opponents are running against them. And that's been one of the glaring weaknesses. It's not just Dame. It's not just Malik Beasley. We've seen a lot of it from MarJon as well, who's taken a lot of those tough tasks. And this is something that takes time, but struggling to get through those screens and just allowing the backcourt to get downhill. That has been a constant problem that we've seen so far this season. And again, not just exclusive to Marjan Beauchamp, but that's one of the big things I think we should all keep an eye on for Marjan as he continues to progress and move forward. We'll get into those numbers. I do have some fourth quarter numbers to share with you coming up after the break. But first, we do have to speak about our friends at FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. You've got a wide range of betting options like spreads, player props, over-unders, and a whole lot more. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's LOCKEDON. FanDuel.com/locked-on. Visit that site now and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, some of these fourth quarter numbers. Camille and Frank did a good job breaking this down last night, but that fourth quarter, there was a lot of up and down play. And I don't want to pile on any players that are not here anymore. And this, again, is one of those challenges when you made the adjustment, when you made that trade to go from Drew Holiday to Damian Lillard, it created a lot of comparison. We've seen the strengths of both players. We touched on the defensive issues and especially keeping guards in check. You can point to what Jimmy Butler did in that first round series against the Bucks a season ago. I would point to what Jimmy Butler did against virtually every opponent until the very, very end of that run. But it's two very different players. Nobody expected Drew Holiday to be a top 10 offensive player. You knew he was a top 10 defensive player. And the same applies to Damian Lillard on the other end of the floor. While this defense continues to figure things out, the offense is going through the same thing. And I know there is no way to quantify this, but I have a feeling a lot of Bucks fans feel the same way as well. Last night's game, I don't believe was a game you win a season prior. With no Chris Middleton available, if you don't make that trade and it's Giannis and Drew Holiday, and Giannis gets ejected 3 minutes into the third quarter, it's Drew Holiday, Brook Lopez in the bench saying, okay, guys, go get him. I think we saw enough of that a season ago and really the last 3 seasons to know that's not the strength. Drew Holiday cannot carry the offense. He can do it at times in the regular season, but that's not his consistent strength. His consistent strength is being a supplemental offensive scorer, which he is in the perfect role with right now with the Boston Celtics, and your primary defender. This is a Pistons team that I know we touched on how much they torched you with their backcourt up until really the 9-minute mark of the fourth quarter, in fairness. But it's a Pistons team that is not loaded with superior wing players. Cade Cunningham's a nice player. Cade Cunningham has taken some growth again this season. I think Marcus Sasser has a lot of nice aspects to his game. Killian Hayes had some nice shots yesterday. Killian Hayes has been very up and down throughout his career as well. It's not a dynamic offense. You could have gotten those stops without elite defenders, and we saw that the final 9 minutes. Part of that is the Pistons being a young team and maybe not working for the best possessions and turnovers as well, but you can get by. This ultimately comes down to scoring the basketball. As much as defense has its role and is important and is the reason why the Bucks won the championship in 2021, you still have to outscore your opponent. And I think the belief within the league is if you have an average defense, we can work on it throughout the year and we can get that to above average. If you have a very good defense, again, put in the same work, we can raise the level of that to very good to maybe even top 10 elite defense. Offense is tougher to do because it's such a skill set, and it's not to say skill does not go into defense as well. But offense ultimately comes down to the phrase Adrian Griffin likes to use a lot, mano y mano. Can you score the basketball? And you need to have gifted shot takers and makers in order to do that. And the Bucks had a dearth of that the last few years. Damian Lillard certainly gives you that. When you look at what Damian Lillard did in the fourth quarter last night, it was one of those games. I saw Camille tweeted about it too. You look up at it and you think, man, Damian Lillard had 30 plus points last night. Wow, it didn't seem like that. 18 points in the fourth quarter for Damian Lillard. got to the free throw line 6 times in that fourth quarter as well. And he went 6 of 11. So all the shooting issues that Damian Lillard has continued to have, it's certainly not there yet, the shot. I do believe it's going to get there. And anybody that followed him in Portland will tell you, look, Dame gets off to slow starts every year. That's kind of his thing. There's a lot more that's going into it this year with Damian Lillard. So it's not your traditional, it's just a slow start for Dame. It's going to improve. But the fact that he did not have his shot last night, and he still got 30 plus points, and he got you 18 points in the fourth quarter, and he had that shot at least inside the arc in those final 12 minutes. That is exactly what this team has missed for the last 3 years. Not even missed, hasn't had for the last 3 years, and now you have it. With no Giannis, the offense changed, and it became, okay, Damian Lillard is going to lead this group. It's not just the scoring ability. It was the 2 guard lineups, the 2 point guard lineups with Dame and Cam Payne. While that does present some challenges on the defensive end, it got your offense much more organized. And that's ultimately one of the bigger flaws that the Bucks had offensively the last 2 years, is you had a number of guys that could handle the basketball and run the offense. But it's kind of like the quarterback saying, you got 2 quarterbacks, you don't have a quarterback. You got 3 guys that are running the offense, you don't have a point guard. And that's what we saw the last handful of years. You have a point guard in Damian Lillard who can run that show. You have a backup point guard, another thing the Bucks never had for the last few years. When you think about the likes of George Hill, a combo guard that was your backup point guard off the bench, even DJ Augustine for the very, very brief cup of coffee that he had here. Point guard, sure, but also more of a combo guard. Bucks haven't had a point guard, and now they have 2 of them. And that was big down the stretch as well, because it gave Cameron Payne the ability to be your point guard so you can free up Damian Lillard running him off ball. It's a game that I just don't think the Bucks win in the past without having Damian Lillard on this team. Damian Lillard has already scored 64 points this season in the fourth quarter. And the amazing part of that is you look back at the Raptors game, which was a blowout. You look at the Hawks game where he had the worst game of his career. Another blowout, nothing doing in either of those 2 fourth quarters. It's essentially 3 games that we're pointing to for those 64 points. 18 of them last night, and then 15 and 13 against the Knicks and the Philadelphia 76ers to open up the season. So right there, we're talking about 46 points in the fourth quarter from Dame Lillard. And he's gotten to the free throw line at a very, very high volume as well. 65 out of 70 this season is Dame, but he's already taken 40 plus free throw attempts in the fourth quarter of games this season. Actually, 25 free throw attempts in the fourth quarter of games this season. So basically a third of his free throw attempts are coming in that quarter. Again, where the Bucks constantly were searching for somebody to get to the line, but also make those free throws. And that's what Damian Lillard is doing. So we're all aware of the impact that Damian Lillard has had on this team offensively in crunch time. We've seen Dame time 3 times. But to me, we touched on this defense coming up with stops down the stretch against the Pistons, coming up with stops down the stretch against the Brooklyn Nets. They did the same as well against the New York Knicks. Those are the 3 games we're going to point to. Sixers game was your best win of the season. But in terms of I saw steady growth, those are the 3 ones that you would point to. So far this season, the Bucks have a defensive rating of 120.6 in the fourth quarter of games. Now, on paper, doesn't sound great to have a 120.6 defensive rating. It's 23rd in the league. We've seen that defense start to get better, though, in those final 12 minutes of the game. It's been the offense that's been the issue for the Bucks. It's been Dame Lillard bailing them out and really no other help there. So 3 times he's had to do it, and Giannis against the Brooklyn Nets. So that's the area I think you look to continue to improve for this team offensively, because as Griff has pointed out several times, the offense helps the defense. I know we're going to keep touching on transition. It's an area the Bucks are going to need to improve, and they're going to need to do that quickly, because you got the Indiana Pacers tonight, who are one of the best offenses in the league. No shock, a team with a dynamic point guard and Rick Carlisle running the show is bolstering a dynamic offense, and that's exactly what the Pacers are. Defensively, they're right in line with what we've seen from the Milwaukee Bucks. Bucks with a 120.6 defensive rating as a whole. Pacers check in at 118. So just as we said, although it wasn't necessarily the case against the Detroit Pistons, and that's in the second half, I beg your pardon, of those games. So the Pacers have been one of the best offenses in the second half. They are the best offense overall in basketball, even better than the Nuggets at 121. Their defense has gotten worse throughout the course of the game. It's a 116 overall and a 118 for the course of the game. That's what we saw for the Bucks too, but it comes down to the offense getting better looks, better shots. And as Griff said before the game yesterday, rebounding, it was a big issue against the Pistons. It's going to continue to be an issue. We're going to continue to point out rebounding and transition as the two areas to keep an eye on, especially transition tonight against the Pacers team that has the best record, the best offense in the league. They play at an extremely high pace. And again, they have one of those point guards that runs the show as he does in Tyrese Halliburton. Those are the guys that have given the types of players that have given the Bucks fits this season. Fifth in three-point shooting as well. So you're going to have to contest quite a bit more than you did against the Pistons, who were fourth in three-point shooting, but took much, much fewer threes per game than the Indiana Pacers do. Their pace is fast. They take threes. They push the ball. They get in transition. And the Bucks are going to have to slowly build on that and get better in the transition game on both ends of the floor. Because even when they do get those opportunities, we've seen the Bucks are not scoring enough in transition. So not to sound like a broken record with these two things, but it is going to be a process. It is going to take time. And we've got to see those transition numbers come up. You cannot be in the bottom five on both ends of the floor as the Bucks are. You got to start to push the defense, especially into the middle of the pack transition-wise. And the Bucks will have their work cut out for them this evening against those Pacers. Stick around afterwards because we'll have the post-game show tonight. It is going to be me and Frank Madden tonight. I'll fill in for Camille, so we'll get you covered with the post-game and thoughts on hopefully a Bucks win, but this should be a fun game with the up-tempo Pacers, and we think a full-strength Bucks team going at it in Indianapolis. All right, we will talk to you later on this evening with your game recap, myself and Frank Madden breaking down the action on Locked On Bucks.